He was a great heart, and it just came out so wonderfully from the man.
People knew that he was talking from the heart, what he believed, and that what he believed had a very high quotient of common sense. And people did not say, oh, he's just doing that for politics.
He was always friendly, he was always jolly, but everybody knew that underneath it all there was a whole lot of steel.
Scoop really liked to treat everybody like he was part of the family. I think he had the biggest family in the world, the whole state of Washington and beyond.
He couldn't possibly have been that close personally to that many people, but people felt that.
Son of immigrant Norwegian parents, raised in the small town of Everett, Washington, graduated from law school in 1936, elected county prosecutor at age 26, elected to Congress at age 28. For the next 43 years, this man served his state and nation in Washington, D.C. He worked with 9 presidents. He wrote laws which changed this country, and he became a symbol of freedom to millions of people around the world. His name was Senator Henry M. Jackson, but everybody called him Scoop.
I once had a chance to look into Scoop's character and see where he drew the strength to become what was, at the end of his career, an international statesman. And it was really the land and the people in Snohomish County. One campaign, he did something very uncharacteristic for him. Instead of talking about a shortcut, he instructed his driver to take a long way around, and we went down through Sylvana and ended up on a little church on a knoll looking out over the Sylvana Flats. And he talked about his youth in Snohomish County, how he'd fished the streams and climbed the mountains. And I got the impression that he didn't view the world in abstract ways. He didn't think of people in the abstract and freedom in the abstract. I think he thought about the people of Snohomish County and extrapolated from there. I think without that love for Snohomish County, Scoop might not have been as great as he was.
This quality exists not just in the small towns, but as you get into the neighborhoods of the big cities, and you just talk to people, even in a complicated metropolitan area, as you converse with people, you can't help but renew your faith in this country. And this is where I think our political leaders have an enormous responsibility. These people want to know. They are curious. They want to be told the facts, and they want someone who will level with them.
Scoop always had a lot of respect for everybody's point of view and wanted to understand in depth why a person brought that point of view to a particular subject. And in 2, Scoop, as the consummate legislator he was, knew he had to understand the views of contesting parties to bring them together and to put together the kind of compromise that a democratic society requires.
Most people he worked with were persons who, one way or another, were engaged in conflict. And they sensed in him that Viking quality, that joy of battle, and the sense of honor he brought to it.
He combined moderation and passion, and that's very difficult to do. On the great issues of our time, from protecting the environment at home to guaranteeing equality in our domestic life to sternness in dealing with totalitarian regimes, Scoop Jackson represented where Americans were, or when they weren't, where they knew in their heart of hearts they ought to be.
Our philosophy, Scoop and I, together, I can't, I underline the word, we were together. Our philosophy carried over from president to president. I remember one time Eisenhower said to me, who was down there on some matter, and he said, Magnuson, he said, I want to talk to you about this. He said, he said, get a hold of Scoop Jackson. I'll have him here too. In other words, he treated us both alike. And so we waited until Scoop came down from the hill.
Most members of Congress, most people, may become specialists in one or two areas, maybe agriculture, military, budgets, foreign policy, environment, or other domestic taxes or domestic issues. He covered the whole spectrum and was tremendously well prepared in all of these areas, and he got involved in all of them.
I suppose the answer is that history is more important than a current ideology, and the behavior pattern established over the centuries is a crucial factor.
History was something that Scoop was a great student of and had a great deal of respect for, because it really foretold the future, not just in terms of what was going to happen, but what was at stake in terms of the morality of man and the morality of nations and where the country was going. As a result, this is the way his colleagues and those who worked with him, I think, in part, remember him for the fact that he brought this kind of intellectual and moral depth to the positions that he took, and that he stood by them no matter how tough the going was.
He would compromise, but he wouldn't compromise the principle, and everybody understood that. And he'd rather go down losing if you had to compromise the principle. But those he fought with and defeated, or those he fought with and lost to, he never carried a grudge. He was a friend of all of them.
And what I would do is say that they could handle on an outpatient basis. That's right.
He didn't just have a formal meeting. He went around and talked to people. He took notes, and he knew what was going on.
He didn't calculate these things in a political way. He wasn't supporting conservation or strong national security or the interest of the elderly, or because he thought that there were human rights, because he thought that there was some particular political benefit in that. He did it out of a deep sense of belief and a strong background of support for those positions, sometimes when they weren't fashionable, in fact, when they were taken at some political risk.
If a politician, they tell me, wants to speak on the campus and really make a hit, he must have a litany of code words. He must proclaim himself as the peace candidate. He must announce that he is for a reordering of priorities.
So over time, I think those who knew him well, whatever their position, whatever their particular attitude on these questions, grew to respect him because he was consistent. He was not wavering. He was not opportunistic. And you knew where Scoop was, and you knew he was there because of his belief and his values.
They will tell you that you are indeed the best generation they have ever produced. Well, frankly, I did not come here this morning to tell you that, because frankly, I do not believe it. I think that that kind of thing is the elitist through and through, which we don't need.
He was way ahead of his time, arguing the importance of the status of our resources and the quality of our environment and what it meant to the quality of our lives and our standard of living long before anybody else was arguing that issue.
He was the one who really started the move, an effective move for the environment in this country with the National Environmental Protection Act. He was the father of that act. He recognized that states by themselves would not be able to do it, that it needed an overall national program in order to protect our environment.
I believe that we can have economic growth. In fact, we must have it, and we can do it with clean air, clean water, and clean land.
Scoop was a professional, By that I mean Scoop understood what you need to do to make government function effectively for people. And it's great to be idealistic, which he was. It's great to have ideas, which he had. But if you don't know how to make the gears of government mesh properly, you can't be effective on your ideals. Scoop knew that, and that's the reason he was so effective.
He brought to our politics a unique combination, and a necessary one. A concern for social justice in this country as an absolute corollary to a concern for oppression and injustice abroad.
Scoop really started the whole human rights push in the United States, in American foreign policy, I guess in the early 70s, with the talk and the development of the idea of the Jackson Amendment, where really for the first time we said, look, our foreign policy is not just involved in what the geopoliticians call our interests, but that it also has a moral dimension, is that we care about human beings, and ultimately, by caring about human beings, particularly in this case behind the Iron Curtain, that becomes substantive. It becomes one of our interests as well as one of our moral pillars. Well, Jackson really introduced this whole idea of introducing human rights into the warp and woof of American foreign policy.
Sonia Goldberg and her family emigrated from the Soviet Union in 1973. She reminisces with Dorothy Fosdick, one of Jackson's closest aides.
My husband and I, we came to the Congress to meet him. And we both could hardly speak English, but we were determined that we will meet him and we will tell him how grateful we were. And we found the office and came in and introduced ourselves.
And then I found Scoop out in the hall. He has just come from a committee, and I didn't have a chance to speak to him, but I said, quick, come on in. Come on in, I want you to meet these people. And
we didn't know anything, and we were talking to everybody and talking, and then suddenly I noticed some difference, like people knew something and they were smiling and they didn't want to tell us. Something was going on. And I also noticed a man who came into the room. He was standing somewhere whom I didn't see before. And his sleeves were like that, rolled up. And he looked like a very, very busy man, but he had a very nice smile.
And I said,
and Dorothy said,
there is Senator Jackson.
And that's what I didn't expect. I didn't expect it at all. I jumped on him, hugged him, and started to kiss him, and he was probably shocked because he didn't know who we were.
He had no idea who this woman was who was being so affectionate.
But he smiled anyways, and then you said that you introduced us.
Yeah, then I introduced you properly.
He was just always ever present, and one of the complaints that many of us had who served with him is that he was just too accessible. Every secretary, every staff person, people on other people's staff were always going to Scoop for advice, and his door was always open. And the Secretary of State might have to wait 15 minutes to see him, but that's just the nature of Scoop and the way he was.
I was in basic training down at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, as a recruit. And a sergeant came to our battery area and asked that Private Monroe report immediately to the base commanding officer. I didn't know what in the world was going on. This is the first time an incident of this kind had happened. I arrived by jeep, taken before the sergeant major. Said, Monroe, do you know how to report to the base commanding officer? I think so, sir. So we'll get in there. He wants you right now. So I walk in the door, and here's this general sitting there, and I said, Private Monroe, reporting as ordered, sir. And he said, Private Monroe, come on and sit down, won't you? How are things going in your training? And I sat down. I was bewildered. I said, Monroe, he said, I received a telephone call from Washington, D.C. this morning, from a United States Senator. I have never talked to a United States Senator before. It was Senator Jackson.
Monroe, Senator Jackson was in Bellingham, and he saw your mother. Would you please write to your mother?
And for years, his office was just down the hall from my office. And every morning he'd come by or he'd go to his office first and come up to my office and say, well, now, who's in trouble in the state now? And we'd get a lot of requests from this and that, and I'd say, so-and-so, well, you take this one, I'll take this one. And the two of us work separately on them and get them done.
Jackson called for a new China policy long before Henry Kissinger made his secret trip to Beijing. Top Chinese leaders respected him, holding extensive private talks on 4 separate trips. Above all, Jackson believed in the power of education. The Jackson School for International Studies is a continuing legacy to his vision.
I'm really rejoiced over the opportunity to come to study in this country. And I'm very much honored to be a Jackson Weyerhaeuser Fellow. Since I was a child, I was taught that U.S. imperialists are our #1 enemy. And through these mutual visits, Americans to China and Chinese to America, it will help us to promote the mutual understanding and the friendship between the two peoples.
There was about him an element of Icelandic saga that people admired. People would have liked to have been like him, and they liked him to like him, and he did. Never knew a man he didn't really like. I knew people he didn't agree with, but he could make that distinction. And if you can do that in our craft, you are blessed. And he was blessed, and as Yeats once said, he was blessed and had the power to bless.
Over the years, I would disagree with Senator Jackson on a number of matters, and it always made me at once amused and a little bit angry to hear some people in the Democratic Party say, well, Henry Jackson's a conservative and not really a proper Democrat. I'm a conservative, and I know Henry Jackson was the best of the American liberal tradition.
Nobody could pin him down as to whether he was a liberal or a conservative. And this gave him a broad support. In this area, the Republicans were voting for him, working for him. He got this tremendous votes in this state, up to 75 and 80% of the vote. And to me, it was the broadness of his stature and the unquestioned integrity and the fact that he knew what he was doing.
The Columbia Basin Project, which Senator Jackson worked so diligently on, brought employment, tourist dollars by all these lakes for hunting, fishing, boating, water skiing, and the many other things that go along with recreation.
I think Scoop's real pull on the people of Washington State was something that was developed not literally on a one-on-one, but almost a one-on-one. You walk around the state, and most people honestly believe they were good personal friends of Senator Jackson.
People have been wondering for years as to why the best American statesmen do not get to be president very often within their generations, and that certainly was the case with Scoop. In a way, the qualities that people were rewarding with success in the primaries in the 1970s particularly were the qualities least essential to governing, a kind of flashiness, a kind of rhetorical shrillness, a kind of willingness to trim your views to the appetites of particular constituencies. All of that went against Scoop's training. What Scoop was a consummate man of government, a man good at using power to get things done. And he had spent so much time developing those skills that he had perhaps not spent enough time developing the more cosmetic skills necessary for the rather less important, rather less noble pursuit of gathering delegates to conventions.
He felt that the American people were capable of following the complexity of the modern age and its dangers. And he would say, I remember him once saying, if all decisions in foreign policy were as simple as the one we faced the day after Pearl Harbor, life would be very different, but they aren't. what his friend Jack Kennedy called that long twilight struggle that we engaged in with totalitarians, and which we continue to do, is a matter of shadow and shade and nuance. And he was not willing to say it was black and white. And he was constantly being just edged out in the political primaries by persons who were prepared to say things were simple when they weren't, who sometimes, in fact, thought they were simple, and who, becoming president, turned out to be simpletons.
With Scoop, it was almost sort of a running joke on the campaign, is if you didn't grab your bag, he would not only carry his bag, but he'd carry your bag off. He'd say, "Come on, Ben, I got your bags, let's go." It was just the kind of man he was. Really expected no special preference for his really exalted status as one of the most, I mean, he was, in his time, one of the most important men in the world. And that kind of thing would go to the head of a lot of people. And with Scoop, it never did. And as I say, you have to be careful that he didn't grab your briefcase and your sling bag to carry it off the plane for you.
There's a tendency on the part of parents to say, well, we've made a lot of money. We can subcontract out the job of being Papa and Mama to so-and-so. We'll just write out a check. I've found that you can't subcontract out the job of being Papa and Mama, no matter how famous you may be or how well-to-do you may be. There is just that need, that ethic, that is at the heart of every lasting religion, a strong family. Isn't this right? When I told my wife that I just received word that I had been selected as the Father of the Year, instead of congratulating me, she turned to me and said, "I think there ought to be an investigation of the Credentials Committee that made the decision."